Are there maybe specific areas in the Alabama market that you have seen higher desire for, like the hot markets, if you will?
They love Fairfield, Hueytown, Midfield, and Center Point. Those are what is in highest demand right now. Fairfield, Midfield, and Hueytown are all located within the same 30-minute range. Center Point is located on the complete opposite side of Birmingham, which is far more north. It's very, very quiet over on Center Point. The reason that people love Fairfield, Hueytown, and Midfield is, one, it's not exactly quiet. There's a high population, I would say. It's more so the people living in those areas are more family oriented. So it's a lot more kids running around. There's a lot more shops. There's a lot more fast food areas. And these tenants, with them being low income, they don't want to waste a ton on gas to have to go drive to somewhere to get some food. They don't want to drive far to have to go grocery shopping. So with that being said, they want to be in that area so that everything is within 5 minutes away from them.
What have you seen investors, like common questions that investors ask you, and how have you been able to help them answer those questions or just get comfort around, especially if you're dealing with out-of-state investors?
One of the most common questions that I receive from investors is, what are the highest demand areas? I'm always open to answering that question. Those areas do change very often. They also ask, with this being Section 8 focused, they always ask how long the process will take. A lot of investors get in this business and they think that we get a Section 8 tenant and the process will start, get them moved in within 2 weeks, 3 weeks of leasing the property. That is not true. This process can take between 1 to 3 months to get this Section 8 tenant in the property. Within the process, what happens is once the tenant has applied for the property and they've already viewed it and such, they have what is called a RFTA, and it stands short for Request for Tenancy Approval. And that would be, I have one right here. And these packets, they consist of 28 pages, and we have to fill out almost every single page and endorse every single one. Once this process is finished, we will grab this and fax it over to Section 8. Once that is faxed over to them, they will reach back out within 1 to 3 days with either what is called a RFTA receipt, meaning they confirm the rental amount and they have accepted it and they're willing to move forward, or they will come back within 1 to 3 weeks with what is called a max rent agreement. This max rent agreement is a portion of rent that they are willing to pay for this applicant for that unit. So with this max rent agreement, we do have to endorse it and sign it back out to them. Once I get approval from the owner, whether they've denied or approved it, I have to endorse it and send it back out to Section 8. Once Section 8 has received that, they will not confirm anything from you. The last thing that they will do is come back and say, okay, well, we need to schedule for inspection. You are on the list. And this list can be extremely long sometimes. And once it's our turn, they will reach out to us and say, okay, when is a good day this week or next week for us to go out to the unit and inspect it? And these inspectors, they don't give us an exact time frame in which they will be there. They just say, we'll be there this day between 11 to 4 p.m. And they won't let us know whether we passed or failed the inspection until the end of the day. So we won't necessarily be able to give you an update until the following day.
Welcome to another episode of Affordable Housing and Real Estate Investing. Today, guys, I am so excited to welcome Daisy Sebastian onto the podcast today. She is an expert in the Birmingham, Alabama market, and she's honestly helping me with my property right now in Alabama. And that's why I'm so grateful to bring on Daisy on the podcast, because she's got a story for you. Like, I literally just told her I cannot wait for my daughter to listen to this one, because she's going to be like, what? You're doing what? So Daisy, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you, Ken?
I am fantastic. And I've been looking forward to this podcast for weeks since I talked to you. And I mean, when I just talked to you, like really briefly, you're like, oh yeah, this area is going to be really good. This area is going to be really good. That just, as an out-of-state investor, that put a ton of comfort in my heart. Seriously. because I was like, wow, this woman knows what she's doing and she's helping me. And she's such a strong, fierce advocate for her tenants. I just couldn't wait for you to come on. So, Daisy, thank you so much for making the time, first and foremost, for coming on to the podcast, because I know you're super busy.
Yeah, of course. And no, I am super excited as well.
Well, Daisy, for people that don't know you, how did you even get into the space of real estate in the first place?
So 2 years ago, I was in college and I wasn't really enjoying my experience in college. I'm not really the type to go to class every day. Now, that's not something that I was really enjoying. I can't do my chores, but I can certainly help run a business with tenants and property management. I met a realtor 2 years ago, and she showed me a little bit about real estate, and I wasn't too into it. She wanted me to lease one of her properties located in Montgomery, Alabama. And at my age, I felt uncomfortable. And I told her, I don't know if I can do this. It felt like a large job to me. Well, she said, just try it out and let me know how you feel about it. I had the roughest time trying to get a tenant in this house. And it took me 1 month to get her in there. And I thought for me, for my first time, that is a very long time. But the more I got into property management, I realized that 1 month was not much. And that was actually very good. With that being said, working with her after I placed the tenant and I seen how happy she was in the home, it gave me a sort of enjoyment, and it made me influenced to want to come on to property management. And I told Amanda, hey, is there any way that I can start working with you and leave college? So I dropped out of college and I started working under this realtor and her property management team. And I have been with her for almost 2 years now, and since then.
What a story, Daisy. First of all, you understood what your strengths were and what you enjoyed. Secondarily, you held yourself to such a high standards, and that's just one of the hallmarks of a high performer, right? Where 1 month to get a property lease is pretty amazing for the most part. But you held yourself to the higher standard, and you always demanded more out of yourself, and you pursued what you were interested in, and you pursued what you're good at. And now here you are 2 years in, and I am just thoroughly, really impressed, Daisy. And let's talk about some of the stuff that you have learned in the 2 years, right? You got your property. Let's talk about the first time you leased out that property. Like, what did you learn? Maybe let's stop back. What were you afraid of? Because I think you had some doubts about yourself. What were you afraid of, and how did you overcome that fear?
So I was afraid of not knowing anything and not having the knowledge to be able to talk to these people. When I first started, and especially with calling the tenants and the leads, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. At that point, I didn't have any training at all. It was kind of just this realtor was testing me to see what I could do. So eventually I just kind of let it go and stopped being so hard on myself and told myself, okay, these people are human beings just like everybody else. And when they go to look at these houses, what do they think? And I put it into my own perspective and thought, if I were to be looking at this home, what are some things that bug me and some things that I would point out? And I always like to put myself in the tenant's position, as well as I would always like to put myself in the investor's position.
Wow. I hope my daughter rewinds that portion of the podcast just like that, Daisy, because I think you framed it perfectly. You said this might be a problem that I'm not familiar with or I'm approaching for the first time, but being able to put yourself in the other person's shoes, sometimes it's as basic as fundamental as that. That's all you really need to become really good at almost anything, because I think most businesses are a people business. I mean, you can never do business by yourself. There's always a counterparty no matter what, right? And I think that's such an important lesson. And now, Daisy, not having been in property management and leasing out units for 2 years now, you just talked a lot about putting yourself into the shoes of a tenant. What about from like the shoes of an investor? What have you seen investors, like common questions that investors ask you, and how have you been able to help them answer those questions or just get comfort around, especially if you're dealing with out-of-state investors?
Absolutely. So one of the most common questions that I receive from investors is, what are the highest demand areas? I'm always open to answering that question. Those areas do change very often, as well as they also ask, with this being Section 8 focused, they always ask how long the process will take. A lot of investors get in this business and they think that we get a Section 8 tenant and the process will start, get them moved in within 2 weeks, 3 weeks of leasing the property. That is not true. This process can take between 1 to 3 months to get this Section 8 tenant in the property. I know that in between those months, the investor usually always gets impatient. Some of the times they think that it's on our end and that we're not responding to Section 8 accordingly, and it's just taking us long. But if Section 8 reaches out to me today and I answer within the same 5 minutes, it may take them 1 week to another month to respond back to me. That's just the way the housing authority works.
And that's such a great point, Daisy, because I think people sometimes have unrealistic expectations, and rightfully so, right? Because investors have to pay their monthly holding costs, they have to pay their debt service and interest. So all that stuff really matters. Now, in terms of taking 1 to 3 months for this entire process to kind of unravel itself, right? You got to find a tenant, you got to show the place, you got to get your applications and inspections set up with the housing authority. So what are some of the ways that you've seen people can be a little bit more proactive and cut down on the total amount of time that it takes to get the unit fully leased up and running, if you will?
So, like I said, those 1 to 3 months within the process, what happens is once the tenant has applied for the property and they've already viewed it and such, they have what is called a RFTA, and it stands short for Request for Tenancy Approval. And that would be, I have one right here. Yeah, perfect. And these packets, they consist of 28 pages, and we have to fill out almost every single page and endorse every single one. Once this process is finished, we will grab this and fax it over to Section 8. Once that is faxed over to them, they will reach back out within 1 to 3 days with either what is called a RFTA receipt, meaning they confirm the rental amount and they have accepted it and they're willing to move forward, or they will come back within 1 to 3 weeks with what is called a max rent agreement. This max rent agreement is a portion of rent that they are willing to pay for this applicant for that unit. A lot of investors sometimes will have a unit listed for $1,200. Section 8 comes back and says, okay, for this applicant, I'm only willing to pay $1,050. You don't have the obligation to move forward with that tenant. You can always decline them. But something that I'd like to do, just so that the investor is still willing to move forward with this tenant who is very interested in their property, is tell them, hey, even though we didn't get the amount that we originally requested, let's go ahead and move forward. And next year, when the lease is up for renewal, why don't we go to Section 8 and ask them for a rental increase considering what the market rate is at, considering any updates that were made to the unit, and what all the properties look like on that same street.
Wow. And then so let's say the landlord approves it, right? And they say, okay, you know what? I'm okay with that amount. What happens next? Does the inspection get scheduled next? What does that communication cadence look like? Are you reaching out to the housing authority to get a schedule, or they will automatically assign an inspector to your property?
No. So with this max rent agreement, we do have to endorse it and sign it back out to them. Once I get approval from the owner, whether they've denied or approved it, I have to endorse it and send it back out to Section 8. Once Section 8 has received that, they will not confirm anything from you. The last thing that they will do is come back and say, okay, well, we need to schedule for inspection. You are on the list. And this list can be extremely long sometimes, and that's why majority of the time, the reason that it takes so long is because we're on the inspection list. The inspection list can be super, super long. And once it's our turn, they will reach out to us and say, okay, when is a good day this week or next week for us to go out to the unit and inspect it? And these inspectors, they don't give us an exact time frame in which they will be there. They just say, we'll be there this day between 11 to 4 p.m. And they won't let us know whether we passed or failed the inspection until the end of the day. So we won't necessarily be able to give you an update until the following day.
Got it. Wow. Thank you for explaining that process so clearly. That was an amazing explanation, Daisy. And I mean, we've heard other tricks from other investors where they might try to have a handyman or some type of contractor there during the time of inspection. Is that even possible in this market? Because it seems like they're giving you very vague time blocks between 11 to 4. And it's kind of hard to make a person stay at the home for that long period of time, just awaiting an inspection. Are there any like ways to prevent failing an inspection? I guess is the best way to ask this question.
Yeah, so what you would want to be looking out for is things that have not been repaired frequently. Simple things like an outlet not being on the property. Sometimes they'll get mad about the carpet not being in good shape. Vinyl flooring, if it's torn up, it needs to be fixed. Cabinet doors in the kitchen, they need to be able to shut and they need to be able to operate properly and they need to have handles on them. Hot water and cold water must be on if it's operated with gas. Both utilities must be on at the time of inspection, and lead-based paint.
Got it. All right. Those are amazing little things that it sounds like people do fail those type of items commonly. But I mean, I had you just at our home and you were just walking through and you were just noticing like these little things that could either fail an inspection or you were noticing that, hey, if you do this, right? I think one of our homes has a lot of surface area. And you said, hey, when it rains, it might create a lot of mud. So is there anything we can do about that? And I love that perspective from you, Daisy, because it points out to me that you truly care about the people that you're helping come into these homes. And I appreciate that so much. And that's just a hallmark of, I hope the people listening today really understand what a great team member looks like. And when someone is proactive and points out those things to you as an out-of-state investor, especially, those are the A talent in the world. And I truly believe that. So that's why I brought Daisy on, because I want people to make sure they're learning from great people like yourself, Daisy. So I want to ask you a little bit more about, and the whole point and the premises behind this question is that I want to help debunk some of the myths about affordable housing. Because sometimes the general consensus about Section 8 tenants is that it's guns, it's drugs, it's drama. What's the reality of the situation? Are all these Section 8 tenants like just drug dealers, or are they just normal, hardworking people? Give us a little bit of color around that and your experience.
So in my experience, I have not met a single Section 8 tenant that was like that at all. All of these Section 8 tenants, they're hardworking. They either didn't have the sufficient funds to be able to have the education that some other people do and simply had to take a different route in order to be able to afford housing. With that being said, obviously they want to have a family just like anybody else would. So with Section 8 helping them and having them behind them, it helps them look for housing that is a good fit. It doesn't have a million problems, and that's why inspections is always behind them.
I mean, I just got some great little pieces of nuggets for you. And most importantly, you helped me debunk those myths. Like, these are just hardworking folks. They're not bad person that the media paints on the media sometimes just because they're just looking for viewership, right? Now,
Right.
obviously, you have worked with some amazing folks, including folks on the Section 8 program. Can you tell us a little bit about your tenant screening process? Like, obviously, if you are a property management company, you want to make sure you're dealing with great people because headaches inevitably cause the business to not work, right? When you spend so much more time on one person that's a troublemaker, that's hard. So how do you guys approach your tenant screening process? Can you just give us a little bit of overview on how you guys evaluate tenants coming in and submitting applications to your properties?
So we use what is called Buildium in order to pull our leads, especially through Tenant Turner. On Tenant Turner, you are able to look at the property's pictures. You can look at all the information, all the amenities on the property, and you are also able to schedule a viewing. Once that viewing is scheduled, we have to come in there and accept the viewing. They have to upload a picture of their ID. It cannot be an old picture. It has to be one that they had taken at that moment. In order for them to receive the lockbox code to the property, they have to share their location, and the GPS has to make sure that they are at the property. Yes, it's very high security. It makes sure that they're at that property that they're stating they scheduled the viewing for. Once it's confirmed that they're at that property, the lockbox code is texted or emailed to them. They view the property, and then as soon as I see that they have either one left feedback, whether it's good or bad, I always give them a call. And for example, if it was bad feedback, I ask them, hey, what was the issue with the house? Why didn't you like it? Okay, the floor was messed up, or this light fixture was missing. that is great feedback. Even if they didn't want to proceed with the home, that's great feedback for me to go back to the investor and say, hey, this is not appealing to tenants, and maybe if we get this fixed, we'll start pulling more leads. On the other hand, if they leave some great feedback and they're interested in applying for the home, right under where it'll state their name, their email address, and their phone number, all on Tenant Turner, right under in blue will say send application link. You were able to send them an application and all in one right after they viewed the property. And I have to go in and Buildium and order their tenant screening. And that tenant screening is sent to the same email address that they provided when they viewed the home. The application asks for your full name, any info, an emergency contact. It also asks for your previous rental history and your work employment. On the screening, we are running their credit, we're running their evictions, and we're running their background. 2 cases. When a tenant is 100% covered by Section 8, most of the time these tenants will be unemployed. We do not look at their credit at all, because considering that they're 100% covered by Section 8, there's really no need to be looking at their credit because they are not paying any rent. On the other hand, for say if they have a portion of rent, for example, Section 8 pays half of their rent and they have to pay the other half. In that case, we are looking at their credit and it must be within fair or above. Their evictions, we specifically, my team does not take any evictions whatsoever. And background, all we're looking for is felonies. We will not take anyone with a felony.
Well, that's really great and consistent screening criteria, because I want people to understand that however you screen your tenants, it's got to be consistent, right, to comply with fair housing laws. So I think that's really important. And I guess the next question I want to talk to you a little bit about is, how long do tenants typically stay in these homes? And let me kind of preface it with saying, are there maybe specific areas in the Alabama market that you have seen higher desire for, like the hot markets, if you will? Could you share, where do people typically like to reside if, like, let's say they're a family, right? What areas in Alabama do they typically prefer to be in?
I love that question. They love Fairfield, they love Hueytown, Midfield, and Centerpoint. Those are what is in highest demand right now. Fairfield, Midfield, and Hueytown are all located within the same 30-minute range. Centerpoint is located on the complete opposite side of Birmingham, which is far more north. It's very, very quiet over on Centerpoint. The reason that people love Fairfield to Hueytown and Midfield is, one, it's not exactly quiet. There's a high population, I would say. It's more so the people living in those areas are more family oriented. So it's a lot more kids running around. There's a lot more shops. There's a lot more fast food areas. And these tenants, with them being low income, they don't want to waste a ton on gas to have to go drive to somewhere to get some food. They don't want to drive far to have to go grocery shopping. So with that being said, they want to be in that area so that everything is within 5 minutes away from them.
Wow, that's great context, because I was literally going to ask you, why do they prefer those areas? And everything you talked about makes complete sense just from a family manager perspective, right? If you're trying to wrangle 2 or 3 or 4 kids, you're not really trying to drive all the way across town to buy groceries, etc. I guess, how much does public transportation matter in these areas? Do you see families typically just walking around? Or are they taking public transportation area? Do they typically have their own cars? What else appeals to families on Section 8 in these areas?
So the majority of them will have a vehicle. With that being said, of course, gas prices nowadays are not very pleasant. So it's not very compliant with their desires. Of course, they don't want to drive across Birmingham to be able to feed their children. Everything is right there in Hueytown.
Got it. And is there anything that an investor can do to make their home more appealing towards families? What have you seen that is really attractive to families, where they're like, oh, I really love this home? Is it the kitchen? Is it the bathroom? Give us some context there behind what do families on Section 8 typically look for?
Of course. So the majority of Section 8 tenants will be mothers. And, these mothers, they love to cook. So the kitchen has got to be their top one. If possible, they love a stone countertop. if the investor of that home was willing to spend the amount of money to put that stone countertop, and or if it came with the property. Of course, the cabinet space, they're not so much worried about the color and what it looks like or the style. They're more so worried about what all they can put in there and how much space they have to work with, as well as the bathrooms. Now, with Section 8 housing, these houses tend to be over 100 years old. Back then, houses didn't have very many bathrooms. It wasn't an amenity that many people looked into. But nowadays, people are just obsessed with bathrooms for some reason. They want to have more than one bathroom. The way that these vouchers work is, for example, a tenant comes to me and she says, I've got a 3-bedroom voucher. If she comes to me and she says she's got a 3-bedroom voucher, that means she's got within the range of 3 to 5 kids. The way that it works is it's 1 bedroom per set of kids. So Section 8 will almost obligate you to have 2 children per room. They're not just going to give you a voucher and say, okay, you're going to get 1 bedroom per children. So with them having children, they obviously don't want to share the bathrooms, especially teenagers. Teenagers don't like to share bathrooms, especially girls. So that's a huge thing for mothers. They need more than 1 bathroom. So if investors could, more than 1 bathroom would be amazing.
Well, thank you for those tips, because I think this helps investors to at least identify not only where to buy the properties, but when you buy those properties, what should you look for? And I think if you're trying to attract the folks that, or if you're trying to help families primarily, then the kitchen area is going to be very important. And having at least 2 toilets, 2 bathrooms ideally, is going to be a huge difference maker. And that might be the difference between you renting out in like a day versus like a month or 2 months, right? So I think those are really, really great and important factors for everybody to consider. Now, after tenants like stay or choose a home, right? Do you know like how long typically Section 8 tenants are staying in the same residence in your market, Daisy, roughly approximately in terms of years?
Yeah, absolutely. So these tenants will stay either within the range of 3 to 7 years in these properties. My belief is that as long as we can take care of these tenants and comply with them and be reasonable with them, they will stay in the property. You need to have a good team in order to keep these tenants, because as important as our clients and investors are to us, we also need to be looking towards our tenants, because we can't just treat them like props, like, okay, let me just stick this Section 8 tenant in here and make this investor happy. Of course, I do care about the investors and the clients and getting their properties rented because they are trusting us, but we also do need to look at the tenants and make sure that they are happy.
Yeah, and I love how you're balancing that, right? You understand that there needs to be some profit, right, for this mission to be sustainable for the investor, but you're balancing that with making sure that you're representing the right investors, someone that you know will bring a great product to the people that you're talking to, so that you can have that pride that, hey, if I'm showing a home, I'm really confident in the work and a product that's being delivered and being shown right now. And I think that's just a great partnership between the property management company and the investor and the tenant themselves. So now that they're in the home, right, Daisy, you talked a little bit about rent increases. How hard is that process? What does that process look like to apply for a rent increase? And is it like pulling teeth, or is it relatively straightforward? What are your thoughts on the rent increase process?
So with the rent increase process, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to apply, go up to Section 8 Housing Authority and ask for that rental increase. You have to have a reasonable say in why you want the rent increase. It has to be something like the rest of the properties on that street are renting for a higher amount, and or your unit looks better than the rest of the units on that street, which are also renting for the same amount that yours is, which would be considered unfair. You can't go to the Section 8 Housing Authority and simply say, I want a rental increase because I feel like I deserve more. They're going to deny you. They're not even going to look into it. They're simply going to say no.
Wow. So you have to provide comparable examples, right? And are you typically just looking at Zillow, the MLS to provide those examples for your investors? How much research does it take to get those rentals? Because how much work is it?
Yeah, so it can be as simple as looking on MLS and looking at the rest of the properties. Sometimes even I like to physically go out there and look at the properties, because pictures may not always be updated on Zillow or MLS.
Well, there you go. And I love how, because I think sometimes people over engineer Section 8. Sometimes they think it's like this big nebulous program, but you've been able to break down every single piece of this and just make it super simple. And for maintenance and repairs, right? Obviously, you're the property management company. what sort of processes do you guys have in place where a tenant can easily communicate with you of any needs that they have so that they can feel like they're being taken care of, but more importantly, that encourages them that you care as a property management company and they're being treated with dignity, and in turn, they want to stay a little bit longer. So what type of processes do you have in place that takes in any maintenance requests and takes care of them subsequently afterwards?
Yeah, so we have a meld. Now, this meld is for maintenance requests, and they are able to go in there and briefly describe what all is wrong with their unit. Within 1 to 2 business days, that meld will be assigned out to either a contractor, plumber, electrician. It all just depends on where the category stands. Those tenants, we are able to text and call them through this property meld. That way that they have the communication and they don't feel as if they are just talking to a robot. That is one of my biggest things. I absolutely hate when I call someone and it's an automated robot. It's my biggest pet peeve. I just want to talk to a human being. And any moment I feel like I need to check on a tenant, I call them. So I'm very big on phone calls. No one just wants to be texted all the time. They want to know that you're there and they want to know that you understand. So at all times, you need to first listen to why they're upset. Sometimes these tenants will call you angry and they may say things that they don't really mean. You need to just listen. Just listen to them, because once they've let out everything and expressed everything that they feel, eventually they'll take a deep breath and they'll say, okay, I'm sorry that I just said that, but I was having a moment. With that being said, right after, you need to acknowledge that you understand what they just stated and that they're upset. So even if you have to come in and say something that sounds utterly stupid, like, okay, I see that you're upset and I understand. Sometimes they just want to hear that. And then you need to actually physically take action at that very moment and say, okay, this is what I'm going to do. If you don't do that, they're just going to continuously blow you up, and they're going to wonder where their management team is and why you're not helping them. And that comes back to how long they will stay in the unit. As long as you take care of them, they will stay there.
Wow, you are so good with your interpersonal skills, because sometimes people underestimate how important communication is. And honestly, such a fundamental piece of this business is it's a people business, and your tenants are people. And when they have problems, just like anybody would, they would like those problems resolved. And you just showed like a very consistent process that everyone should apply, frankly, in their business, especially in real estate investing. And you just shared a little bit about how you handled those problems, right, Daisy? And can you just share like 1 or 2 examples of problems you've encountered over the last 2 years of your career? And what were those problems and how did you solve them? Don't have to use any names or any addresses or anything like that. But if I could just use your help, because if I can make this business seem a little bit less scary for people, where they can say, oh, I don't ever want to get into Section 8, or I don't ever want to get in real estate because I'm so afraid of these things happening. If they could just learn from you, Daisy, and say, oh, Daisy had this problem before, and this is how she solved it. And you have any examples of stories like that you can share with the audience today?
Yeah, absolutely. So one actually not that long ago, when she moved in, her furnace started leaking. Rather than having any kind of flooring, she had carpet. It was leaking and it was coming onto the carpet. I acknowledged it before her, so I immediately took care of it before she had even noticed. I had called contractors and stated, hey, we have this issue. This issue needs to be addressed immediately before MRI starts to form and the unit starts to stink. She moved in the very next day, and obviously I addressed the issue to her, and I said, hey, look, this is going on, but I've already got it handled. She was not even upset at the fact that I had already had it handled. I already took physical action in getting it handled before she got into the property and said, hey, I need to submit a maintenance request on my first day living here. She was not bothered at all. So she's been happy, and this happened actually 2 days ago, and today the issue is being taken care of. They're pulling up the carpet and they are replacing it, and the furnace is being fixed. And not once did she scream at me, not once did she yell at me or sound utterly very upset. Obviously, it was an issue that made her upset, but she was not upset at me or use angry words because I took care of it.
Wow, that's such a great example of how you handled a problem, and honestly, just proactively solved it. Because I think if everyone could take something away from that, it's just if you see a problem, fix it up front, because then you can avoid so many more headaches down the road. If you know that's going to be a problem in like a month or two, why go through the pain of waiting for that call and then fixing it and then causing a bad experience when you could just be upfront about it and just take care of the things? That's such a nice little gem there, Daisy. How about like working with the housing authorities? Have you seen any opportunities where any lessons learned about how to communicate better with them, or just how to generally work better between the investors and the housing authority? Any sort of problems that you encountered that you learned from and you would like to share with the audience today on what type of problems might come up and how might they solve it?
Yeah, so the housing authority is completely booked. They are very busy at all times. If you go in that office, you'll know what I'm talking about when I say that they are always super busy and they were always super scattered all over the place. And I know that they are extremely exhausted. So God bless them for all the work that they do. One thing that I've encountered with them is emails. That's how we communicate with them. With these emails, like I stated before, it can take them within 1 to 3 months to even respond to an email. You have to understand that they get so many emails, and it's not just you emailing them, it's various companies emailing them. And they have to go through this every day and break everything down and make sure that they've got everything covered. So a way to form a relationship with these people and get them to respond to you quicker is have them know who you are. So one thing that I like doing is I like to, every 1 to 3 weeks, go down to the office and just talk to them. Even if I'm bothering them about an inspection date, or if I'm bothering about a tenant wanting something, at all times you need to be nice to these people, but just form a relationship with them. I have a relationship with about 3 of the caseworkers in Birmingham Housing Authority. Anytime that they see me, they're like, oh, there she is, and hi, how are you? So they know who I am, and they always respond fairly quickly to my emails now.
That is such a great lesson. And Daisy, I thank you for first setting the stage that I want investors to really understand. Chances are folks at housing authorities are probably understaffed, they're probably overworked. So if you can just be a kind human being, first and foremost, and maybe just take the time to thank them for what they're doing, that could really go a long way. Not because you want something like transactionally out of that thank you, but seriously, just take some time because they're doing a very hard job and they are overworked typically. Daisy just talked to you about like just the email queue and how many emails they have kind of unread open at one time. I mean, these are real problems that almost every housing authority face because of staff shortages. So Daisy, thank you so much for highlighting that and just reminding all these investors that are listening right now, just take a breath and just be a good human being first and foremost, and just be respectful, not only to your property management company, not only to the housing authority, just to everybody in general. So I appreciate that so much, Daisy. And I kind of want to bring this conversation now to just, there seems to be like new regulations all the time that comes up with Section 8. How do you stay on top of like new developments or things that are happening in your market? Anything that you can kind of share with the audience today on lessons that you've learned about just trying to keep up with all these regulations? Because from what I understand, you're probably working with like a couple of different housing authorities at once in Birmingham, right?
Yes, we actually do work with 3 of them. It is Bessemer County, Jefferson County, and Birmingham Housing. Each one of them work totally different. All of their caseworkers are different. You have to comply to all of their regulations. One thing that I learned recently is that all of the files that we receive from Section 8, we are not allowed to share those with the tenants. Those files that Section 8 emails to us and we're back and forth in, those files are not to be shared at all with the tenants. You can inform them what the situation was and what the form stated, but you cannot physically show them the form.
That's interesting. I never knew about that regulation, to be honest with you. So I just learned something new from you.
Yeah, I learned that, I think it was like last week.
All right. Well, Daisy, we're coming up to the end of the podcast now. And sometimes I like to ask this question all the time. And I'm always curious to like hear what people think, because the premise behind this question is people say we can't solve for affordable housing, particularly the lack of supply of affordable housing. And I'm sure you see firsthand just the amount of demand, right, for affordable housing in your market. Based on your experience, like, why do you think affordable housing, particularly the lack of supply of affordable housing, is so hard to solve for? And there's no right or wrong answer. I just view you coming onto the podcast as another piece of the puzzle, right? Because I think if we collect enough pieces to the puzzle and get enough perspectives, we'll put it all together and we'll solve this problem. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I personally love affordable housing. Affordable housing is an amazing way to pull these leads. It just makes sense in the name. It's affordable housing. So with low income tenants, they go on this website, they're looking for low income houses, and they immediately will text you their information and they'll text you, "Hey, I'm interested in this property." One thing that I like to do is as soon as I receive that text, I don't sit there and chit chat through affordable housing with them. I pull them, immediately call them, and turn them onto our website where they can view specifically my team's properties. And that way, rather than them looking at a bunch of property managers and teams' properties, they're only looking at ours. And it won't matter what property they pick, because at the end of the day, as long as they pick one, they're going to make one of many investors happy.
Wow. So I think what I'll take apart from that is just your level of engagement to make that process easier for your tenants, but two, your responsiveness and how quick you are to make that process just feel a lot smoother for your residents. That helps a ton too. So, Daisy, this has been such a great conversation.
Mhm.
If you had like any like last parting words for either tenants or the housing authorities or for investors, do you have any like advice for people that are looking to enter this world of affordable housing, and what might that advice be for them that's just looking to enter this space?
Yeah, absolutely. So, on behalf of investors, it can be scary because you're putting a large amount of money into these houses and you're trusting a management company to lease this house within a time frame that is very scary. I personally would love to get into investment, and I too am scared. And you have to come to the understanding, especially from the property management team, that we're all human and we all have different emotions and feel different ways about this whole situation. Some investors can be scared, and it's absolutely fine to be, especially entering something like this. You're told that Section 8 tenants are the best thing in the world, so you get into it, and then you're told that Section 8 tenants are everywhere, and you come to the impression that as soon as you buy this property and hand it over to a management team, that it's going to be leased within 1 to 2 weeks. That is not true. Also, on behalf of the residents and the tenants, these people are human beings, and when they look at these properties, when I go with them to view the properties, they're looking at where they're going to put their couch. They're looking at where they're going to put their bed. And it's small things like that that some people don't always think about when it comes down to the layout of these homes. They're thinking about the home just like you would be as if you were purchasing a house. They want it to be fit for their family.
Thank you so much for just humanizing everything, Daisy. I am so grateful that you came onto the podcast today. I learned a ton from you today. I love the amount of details you gave with your answers today, because I know someone listening today is going to be able to and listen to this podcast like, wow, I actually understand this process a lot better now. So I'm just so grateful for folks like you, Daisy, with a great heart. And seriously, without people like you, I would have never had the home I grew up in. So I appreciate this and what you do every single day so much, Daisy. Thank you so much for what you do.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm greatly appreciated to be working in this business. I love seeing the smiles of these tenants when they move into the property that is a lot better than their previous.
Daisy, maybe we should end with one story. Do you have like a memorable story of a family you've helped by putting into one of these homes? Because if I could just have someone leave this podcast today feeling a little bit more inspired and thinking about the folks that you've been able to help by placing them into one of these beautiful homes, I think that would be a huge success.
I'll never forget this one tenant. She moved into her property. She was super excited. She was already telling me that this was her first home ever. She had 4 children with her. She had this little girl who I believe was no older than maybe 4 or 5 years old. And she gave me a hug at the time of signing her mother's lease. And she said, "Thank you for getting me a home." And that just, it was an extremely emotional event for me. I tried my hardest not to cry because it was just sweet. She is an absolute sweetheart. Her mother raised her perfect, and I had never had that before, and I'm glad that I was able to get her in that home.
Oh, thank you so much, Daisy. I feel so touched. I feel so wholesome right now after listening to that story, Daisy. I don't think we can end this podcast on a better note. So, Daisy, thank you so much again for being on this podcast today. Thank you so much for making the time. If people want to follow you or learn more about your story, Daisy, can they find you on social media? Where else can they learn more about you?
Oh, yeah, of course. So I am on Instagram. So it's going to be HISLONLEYSTAR.
All right, everybody, please make sure you follow Daisy. Reach out to her. Don't blow her up because she's busy. But if you guys have great questions or you have more questions about the process, Daisy is an amazing resource. I have learned a ton from her already. So please make sure you follow her. And Daisy, thank you so much again for coming onto the podcast. Maybe I can bring you back on in a year or two, especially once you get your investment journey started. I would love to bring you on a podcast and have you tell that story.
Yeah, of course. I'm super excited to get that.
All right, and we are out.